Xtra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening. I'm your host, Dylan McKim. For the next half hour, we are talking about inflation and its impact on borderland residents. What is happening with the interest rates? Are we close to a recession? How can you manage your money to get through this? The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation shows prices surged again last month. The federal government reports the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index for August rose by 6.2% from the same month a year ago. For July, it was 6.4%. July's reading was viewed as a driver behind the central bank's decision to raise its benchmark rate by 0.75 percentage point for the third time in a row earlier this month. This latest inflation data puts more pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who has vowed to make taming inflation the central bank's overarching focus. The index hit an alarming 40-year high in June, and August's reading flashes a warning sign about the persistence of high prices. And grocery store prices don't look like they will be going down anytime soon either. New government data shows grocery prices climbed 13.5% in August from the year before. That's the highest annual increase since March 1979. Food producers say the surge is a result of paying higher prices for labor and packaging materials. They also point to extreme weather, disease, and supply issues. Market experts say food inflation is expected to moderate next year, but that doesn't mean prices are going to drop. Typically, once prices hit a certain level, they tend to stay there or go up, but rarely do they go down. Now, joining me to discuss this is Tom Fullerton, a professor of economics and finance at UTEP, and Brian Myro, the owner of Myro Capital Management. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Dylan, thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Tom, I want to start with you. We heard what the inflation, the measurement for inflation was this past month in August. Can we get an idea of what inflation looks like in the El Paso metro area? Is it the same as what we're seeing countrywide?
El Paso, let's see, sometimes is above the national average, sometimes it's below it, but generally all major metropolitan economies in the United States track the overall price indices, whether it's the consumer price index or the personal consumption expenditures index. Occasionally, consumers in El Paso can take advantage of having access to lower price goods and services across the river in Ciudad Juarez. But for the most part, we track the national price indices pretty closely.
Would you say that the prices in Ciudad Juarez have also been impacted, but just not as greatly?
No, prices in Ciudad Juarez have been impacted. Inflation is going up in Mexico, and that includes northern Mexico, but sometimes prices are lower there. The most recent example of this was during the infant formula shortage in the United States. A lot of residents here in the Borderplex went across the river and bought or had access to lower priced or reasonably priced infant formula there. That wasn't the case in other regions of the United States.
Now, Brian, we just talked about the grocery prices, 13.9% increase in grocery prices. Of course, everyone across the country is feeling that as they go to get their food. Are there other markets or industries that were also greatly impacted by the inflation we're seeing?
Well, Dylan, you know, inflation affects all industries, but yes, there's several industries that are most impacted. Now, three of the top affected industries are, of course, oil and gas. You know, we're seeing that at the gas pump and when we go to fill up our cars. And if you're going to buy a new car, if your car's wore out and you have to go buy a new car, we're seeing the price of motor vehicles up. And of course, if you have an older car and you're having to get it fixed, we're seeing the cost of parts from parts stores are up quite a bit this year. And then also, you know, the furniture and home furnishing stores, we're seeing them at a higher level now than what they've been in the past. And then, of course, you know, small business has been impacted greatly as well.
Tom, what kind of industries have you seen?
Manufacturing and transportation sectors typically get hammered when inflation is pretty high, and their profit margins are taking a hit this year.
I mean, of course, that's going to affect when people go to the grocery store, when people go to fill up their gas. And like Brian said, even if you're trying to go furnish your apartment or your new home, you're going to see those prices impacted. And Tom, you said manufacturing, transportation, they're usually impacted greatly when inflation goes up. What kind of What can El Pasoans and borderland residents, how is that going to impact them when you see manufacturing and transportation be impacted?
Well, El Paso is geographically isolated from much of the United States, and we've got a very fractured urban geography here. So anytime gasoline and diesel prices go up, it impacts, the ability of businesses to compete nationwide, from given our isolated location here in El Paso. And it makes the cost of living and the cost of doing business more expensive for households and businesses that are local. And, it just simply costs more to get from one area of El Paso to another area than it does in a typical, sort of concentric, geographic arrangement for other cities. So you find that, household balance sheets are hurt by high inflation. And also the profit margins of most businesses here locally are hurt to a larger extent than they are in other regions of the United States. That's just a reality that we really can't get around.
And Brian, when prices are like they are, people, of course, are going to be stingy with their money, and they may not buy as many products. You said it could affect small businesses. In turn, how will that affect the job market? Will that cause layoffs?
Well, when businesses aren't bringing in the revenues that they normally are, or they're having to spend more money to operate their business, well, of course, they've got to cut back somewhere. And if you have more going out in expenses than you have coming in revenues, then you got to start tightening the belt a little bit, and
right.
Which can lead into businesses having to start laying people off. We're seeing a lot of companies across America now starting to do that. I think we just saw a big layoff with Meta, Facebook, and all that, and that's the first time that's happened to them in history, and that's trickling down, and we're seeing that in a lot of industries today.
I'm curious, how does the United States? Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say I agree with everything Brian said. The other thing might be useful to point out is that there's been a shift in consumption, and a lot of the luxury goods end of the market, their sales have stagnated or have started to decline. And people are now shifting in favor of the necessities end of the spectrum. They're being cautious, as they well should be.
I'm curious, how does the United States compare to other countries around the world? Are we about par when it comes to inflation, or are other countries doing better?
Dylan, you broke up. Did you address that to me?
Sure. Yeah, Brian, I'll ask you again.
Okay.
How does the United States compare to other countries around the world when it comes to inflation?
Well, we are seeing inflation being impacted around the world, and as far as an impact on spending, it's with everything costing more. People are not able to spend as much, but we are seeing a global trend of inflation, throughout the UK and all over the world right now.
And Tom, we talked about the Federal Reserve.
I want to say that.
Go ahead.
Let me just dovetail a little bit on Brian's comments in the following manner. Even though people are complaining in the United States about inflation and higher prices, actually the United States is doing better than many other areas of the world, in large part because of the supply chain disruptions associated with the Ukrainian invasion by Russian armed forces. Inflation is much higher in Western Europe than it is here in the United States. And in the area of food prices, the Middle East and Africa have been hammered to a larger extent than the United States is, and that's because they rely on the Ukraine for a lot of their commodities.
Wow. Okay, it's interesting to think about. Well, where do interest rates stand today? We talked about the Federal Reserve. They keep on raising those interest rates. Where are they currently, Tom?
Interest rates range from about 2.7% all the way up to, well, for credit cards, they're up above 20% in a lot of cases. But in terms of the standard interest rates, about the highest one out there right now is 6.3% for the corporate prime rate. And interest rates have moved substantially above where they were 12 months ago. The question is, are they going to continue rising? And I'm on record with Bloomberg as stating that, the federal funds rate is going to head up to at least 5% because of built-in inflationary pressures that exist currently.
Well, explain to us, for viewers who may say, okay, 5%, what does that mean, the federal funds rate? I mean, what can even like let's say a 75-point increase in the interest rate, how can that affect people?
Well, the Fed has now implemented 4 interest rate hikes in 2022 and 3 consecutive 75 basis point hikes. So how we see serious these are to fight inflation, and that's the reason why we're doing it. We see much of a change in the short term as far as inflation, but no, long term, we hope this could help them get a grip on inflation. And interest rate hikes, they affect many things. Several of the big ones that they affect is the stock market. It's not hard to see the wild roller coaster ride of the market that we've been on. And, of course, it affects the housing market. It wasn't just too long ago you could get a mortgage rate in the 2s and 3s, and they're marking in the 6s and 7s at this time. It's pretty tough right now for a first-time home buyer, or really any home buyers who are looking to refinance. And credit cards, we're seeing incredibly high credit card rates. If you own any credit cards, paying off of those should be one of your number one priorities. And of course, your savings account, this is a small bright spot, but you want to take advantage of savings accounts that have annual percentage yields that are starting to grow a little bit.
Do you both think the Federal Reserve will raise the interest rate any more this year?
Definitely. Let's see, the Federal Reserve is trying to get a handle on inflation. It doesn't want that genie to get any further out of the bottle than it already is. So more interest rates are coming in the future, which means that retirees are pretty happy because certificate of deposit rates are going up. Those are the deposit rates that Brian was just speaking about. But anybody that is a borrower, has got to be very careful in terms of how they structure any type of borrowing that they do.
Let's take a quick break, guys. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the housing market and whether or not we are close to a recession. Stay with us.
Watch Smart Money Thursday on ABC-7 at 4 with Myro Capital Management. You'll learn how to save money the right way and make better decisions to set you and your family up for financial success. Smart Money Thursday on ABC-7 at 4, sponsored by Myro Capital Management.
If Yvette Harold had her way, abortion would be banned with no exceptions for rape, incest, or saving the life of the mother, and she'd throw women in jail who had one. Yvette Harold is absolutely wrong, and her extremist positions are not only an attack on women and their rights, they're dangerous. I will always protect a woman's right to choose. I'm Gabe Vasquez, and that's why I approve this message.
Every story has meaning. Top story's been updated.
Great.
Focus, commitment, determination, these aren't just words, it's a promise. Andres, how are the roads?
Looking good and green.
Every detail matters. Beautiful morning.
It is, but there's a change in the weather models. I'll be issuing a first alert.
Start your day the right way.
Experience you can count on.
Information you can trust.
We're going 3, 2, 1.
Rise and shine, El Paso. I'm Hillary Florin.
And I'm Saul Sainz.
Yo, camping buddy. Okay, you guys ready?
Dude, I thought you were driving.
I thought you were driving.
Oh, I never said I was driving.
I definitely can't drive.
Okay.
If you're high, just don't drive. It's illegal everywhere. If you feel different, you drive different.
93.1 Kiss FM, today's best mix. Where Mike and Iris starts your day. Open the 93.1 Kiss FM mobile app.
Welcome back to ABC-7. Stocks slid at this morning's opening bell on Wall Street. That's after new government data showed inflation rose in August. The latest inflation data puts more pressure on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who has promised to focus on taming inflation. However, investors are worried aggressive interest rate hikes from the Fed could cause a recession. I want to invite our guests back in, Brian Myro and Tom Fullerton. And the question, guys, Brian, I'll start with you first. Are we close to a recession?
Well, it looks like if we're not close to it, if we're not already in one, if you look at the definition of a recession, according to the definition, we're in one right now. But with rising prices and just the kind of like what Tom was talking about earlier, with the supply chains and everything that's impacting businesses today, it's getting tougher and tougher out here, and you just have to be real diligent at this time to make sure you watch where your dollars are going. And but yes, I'm pretty much in agreement that we're in a recession right now.
Tom, what do you think? Tom, we still have you? I think we might have lost Tom's connection right there. Tom, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Tom, do you agree with Brian's assessment?
If we're not in a recession, we're very close to one. Anytime, interest rates rise as much as they have risen in recent months, that causes the cost of doing business to increase. It reduces demand by consumers, for good reasons. And it just places the economy. It causes the economy to decelerate. Mm-hmm. The Fed was trying to engineer a soft landing, but now that the consumer prices have risen by more than 8% for 3 consecutive months, they really have a lot of pressure on them to focus on price stability, or at least that part of their mandate more. And they can do so because the unemployment rate is so low. Now, officially, we won't be into a recession until unemployment rate rises by 50 basis points or more. Mm-hmm. That hasn't happened yet, but a lot of people will tell you, even if we're not in a recession, it sure feels like one.
Yeah.
You say the word recession, of course, people, their ears perk up. They start getting a little worried. I think they have flashbacks to 2008, 2009. Is that what we could expect? That same kind of thing happening?
I think if there's going to be a recession this year, it'll probably resemble the recession that occurred in 2001. That was in the aftermath of when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Energy prices rose substantially. Here locally, it was interesting. Employment kept rising, but personal bankruptcies in both El Paso and Las Cruces increased as a consequence of that. And so even though there were a lot of metrics on which the regional economy continued to do well in 2001, personal bankruptcies did increase, and that's probably what we're going to observe this time around.
Okay. Brian, what do you say?
I'm sorry, you broke up on me again.
Well, I was asking Tom. Well, first of all, let me ask, the Federal Reserve, of course, they are raising the interest rates to combat inflation. Do you agree with that strategy?
Oh, absolutely. Well, they do, but when you start raising them too much, too fast, it has an impact on the markets and everything else. But yeah, they're trying to cool it down just because of the inflationary rates that we're seeing right now. They're at they're the highest we've seen in several years, and it's getting tough out here for the consumer. Mm-hmm. When you go to and a lot of the inflation numbers that you're seeing out here, a couple of things that they do not include is the places where we spend most of our paycheck. That don't include the food and the fuel. So when you start looking at the food and the fuel on top of that, yeah, we're absolutely in a pretty high inflationary period, and that's what they're trying to slow down.
Is there any other time in American history that resembles this, or are we in unprecedented times, Tom?
We're kind of resembling the late 1970s at this point, with the difference that the Federal Reserve is not trying to accommodate inflation the way that it was after the OPEC 1 and the OPEC 2 shocks, but it's very similar. We had big supply chain shocks at the end of 1973 and in 1979. We've got, more supply chain shocks in terms of 2022 with the pandemic and with the war in Ukraine. I'm just crossing my fingers that we don't see another upsurge in terms of a new variant of the coronavirus this fall. If we can avoid that type of health crisis this fall, that will help us be able to handle all of the bad news out of Ukraine. But right now, there's a lot of tough economic times out there. And even though interest rates have gone up, they still have not matched the prevailing rate of inflation. So anytime, interest rates are negative in real terms, that always tends to spur additional borrowing. So things are it's a very tricky set of circumstances that are confronting, let's see, the Federal Reserve as well as the Treasury Department in Washington, D.C.
Brian, I briefly want to talk about the housing market. You addressed it a little bit in our last segment, but in terms of the housing market, there has been a cool down in buying houses. The demand has gone down because of the increase in interest rates. Is it concerning for new homeowners right now with the way mortgage rates have increased?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing data signs right now of the housing market cooling off, and even though there's the housing market is still strong, it's with what's happening is inventory is increasing due to higher mortgage rates. When you could get real cheap money out there and buy a house, in the 2 and 3% range, it allowed you to buy more house and keep your payments the same. And as we start to see these interest rates go up, of course, that's going to reduce the amount of house you can buy. Plus, the inventory that's going on out here is very, very low. I know the contractors and builders all over the place cannot keep up with the demand right now. That's why the pricing of housing has gone way up. And they were talking about that down in Florida after the hurricane just hit, about the demand that's going to be getting contractors out there to get stuff fixed while they're still building houses all over the place. So absolutely, it's going to cool it off a little bit. But there still seems to be a pretty good demand for the housing market.
A great point there, Brian. Hurricane Ian, causing some more issues with the housing market there. We'll take a quick break right now. We'll come back. We'll have some tips on how to save money in these tough times. Stay with us.
He's never had his feet in stirrups.
Serious complications.
Or been forced to make that difficult choice.
So Mark Ronchetti is not the guy, definitely the wrong guy to make healthcare decisions for me.
But Ronchetti praised the Supreme Court, giving power over women's healthcare to politicians like him.
And said he'd take away rights from New Mexico women.
No politician should make healthcare decisions for women.
But Ronchetti, definitely the wrong guy to make them for me.
Paid for by a stronger New Mexico.
For context, depth, and perspective you won't see anywhere else, tune into ABC-7 Sunday Extra.
You think there should be a change in gun laws in the state of Texas?
Join Dylan McKim Sunday nights at 10:35 as he brings in-depth debates on the borderland's most pressing matters.
What programs are in the budget proposal right now that are keeping streets maintained or improved?
The big stories, impactful issues, tough, fair discussions, only on ABC-7 Sunday Extra.
There's a clear and present danger in neighborhoods like this. It's deadly fentanyl, and it's killing our kids. How's it getting here? Right here, through our border.
This year alone, law enforcement has seized enough fentanyl in Texas to kill millions. But Beto O'Rourke supports open borders. He says there isn't a problem at our border. Not a problem? Drug cartels, human traffickers, the most dangerous border in the world. Beto O'Rourke, too radical, too dangerous for Texas.
Chevy Silverado. It's got the power you want and the capability you need to do the job so you can get to the important work. Find new moments, find new roads. Get a $500 cash allowance on all 2022 Silverado pickups with a 2.7-liter turbo engine. Plus, now during truck season, get a $1,000 accessory allowance toward a new Chevy truck with accessories. Chevy drives Texas. Find new roads.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I am still joined by Brian Myro and Tom Fullerton. And Tom, Brian, of course, people are going to want to know what are some ways to save some money in these very difficult financial times. Tom, I'll start with you. Any good tips you can give our viewers?
Well, for those who have enough storage capacity within their houses, they can buy in bulk. That helps out, but you've got to have the storage space to take advantage of that. The other thing is to be flexible with weekly budgets and be willing to shift around in terms of where the specials are, even if that means, let's see, here in El Paso that we might have to consume more fish than we do normally, pork or beef. The other thing is, let's see, try to use your automobiles as little as possible. So combine trips whenever possible. And let's see, avoid using your automobile because even though we had 100 straight days of lower gasoline prices are still substantially above where they were 1 year ago. And let's see, gasoline and diesel prices are probably going to plateau from here out until Thanksgiving when they'll start increasing again.
Brian, what say you?
Yeah, just a couple of basic rules. If you can remember, if you don't have money in your pocket, don't spend it. You got to be disciplined and live within your means, because the world doesn't tell us to do that out there. The world tells us to buy it today and pay for it tomorrow. And the second basic rule that you can follow is, make yourself $1. Make sure you save yourself $0.25 for hard times, because you're going to have hard times, and we're starting to see some of those right now. So what that means is don't go out and get into debt and have debt that you have to service, and become a disciplined saver.
One last question for both of you. If there is a way to predict how much longer do you think these tough times will last? Tom?
Well, interest rates have got to increase some more before inflation cools off. That's unfortunate, but we had a long period of very low interest rates, subnormal interest rates. And so at some point, interest rates had to turn positive in real terms. In other words, interest rates really need to be above the rate of inflation. We've got to bring down that inflation rate. So there's a lot of uncertainty that looms in the future. At least we're going into it in good shape. The unemployment rate's low. Savings rates are not as high as they could be, but at least they're higher than what they typically have been over the course of the last 20 years. So we're in pretty good shape. We will weather this storm, but this storm has got, quite a ways to go before it finishes.
Brian, do you agree with Tom?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Tom. It's just, everything that we've talked about is so critical and so important, because, if you don't follow the basic rules as far as, living within your means, and, when you get ready to make buying decisions, ask yourself if, do you really need to do that? And just be very disciplined in your spending and where your money's going. And, make sure you're working off a good tight budget. As far as how long this thing's going to last, it's, kind of like Tom said, back in the 80s, we saw interest rate in the double digits, like in the late 70s, but also we had pretty high interest rates. You had mortgage rates that were in the 13 and 14%, but you could also go to the bank and get a 15% CD as well. And it looks like it's kind of creeping back up that way.
Brian Myro, Tom Fullerton, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
Dylan, thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Dylan McKim, and this has been ABC-7 Extra.